how many businesses in this world can you give back with no ulterior motive and then ultimately have it turn into business in the future? That's probably the best thing that I could say of everything in our industry. Get involved with a board that you're passionate about, and it's amazing how your life will change.
Welcome to the Commercial Real Estate Academy podcast, the podcast dedicated to simplifying the commercial real estate industry for the masses. Each week, we sit down with industry experts to dissect the many facets of commercial real estate and extract valuable lessons you can apply to your business. Whether you're a new or seasoned business owner or investor, the Commercial Real Estate Academy podcast will be your go-to resource for all your commercial real estate needs. Now, here are your hosts, Raphael Collazo and Jeff Walston.
Welcome to the Commercial Real Estate Academy podcast. I'm your host, Raphael Collazo, here with my co-host, Jeff Walston. How's it going, my friend?
It's going great. Can't complain. 2023 has started out wonderfully. Blessed, as I would like to say, and trying to survive this ice storm that we had here in Louisville, Kentucky. It's an interesting thing that winter's been throwing at us. So what about you, Raphael? How's it going over there?
Great. Yeah, it's been an interesting winter. I would say it's a little bit milder than I've remembered over the last couple of years, but you're right. The roads have been kind of slick. But as far as businesses goes, it's been very active in 2023, unlike what you see in the media. It seems like there's still a lot of activity out there. But as far as our guests today, we're really honored and excited to have Patrick Sentner, the Executive Vice President at CBRE. I believe he's located in Pittsburgh. Really excited to talk about him on a variety of different subjects. He's heavily involved in SIOR as well. So I know we'll touch on that in the podcast interview as well. So welcome, Patrick.
Thank you very much. I appreciate the opportunity to be here with you, gentlemen.
Absolutely.
Thanks for coming on.
Oh, absolutely. No, we're honored to have you. And we had a few back and forth to try to coordinate this, but we're really honored that we were able to get this in the books and get this going. So one thing that we typically like to do when we first get started with the interview is we like to learn a little bit more about the person that's across the table from us. So if you don't mind kind of sharing your backstory, I think it'd be awesome.
Absolutely. I grew up in Western Pennsylvania, actually a small suburb of Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. And my mom cleaned houses and my dad worked in a warehouse. So I honestly had no clue what my future was going to be like. Started caddying starting in 8th grade. And that's when my eyes started really opening up to a much broader world. Coincidentally, I started caddying for some of the bigger contractors and developers in Pittsburgh. So that was kind of my first, at least, taste of real estate, just hearing those gentlemen talk. And go to college at a small liberal arts school called Westminster College, the only school that kept recruiting me for track after I had knee surgery. So one offer, and I took it, and was one of the best things I ever did. Gave me the opportunity to really get involved, which I don't think I could have done at a larger school. Came out as a finance major, worked as a commercial lender for about 5 years, got my master's at WVU, and then got a taste of commercial real estate brokerage. And that was almost 28 years ago, and it has been a whirlwind ever since.
I can only imagine. No, yeah. And you touched on the fact that, you know, you dove into the lending space. I'm sure that helped build some foundations for you as you went into the brokerage career, because that's one of the things that, you know, a lot of people don't necessarily have a lot of background in. So if you can understand that side of the business, I'm sure it helps a lot.
It did two things for me. Number one, I mean, I spent a year basically as a credit analyst, which at the time I'm thinking, my goodness, I'm sitting behind a desk for 9 hours a day, 5 days a week. This is boring. However, I reviewed financial statements from small mom and pops to, you know, large multinational corporations, and had to write reviews of those. So after a year, I really understood how companies operate, what their financial statements mean as it pertains to, you know, business, including real estate. And also what it did is gave me the opportunity to start my cold calling, which, it's funny, in banking, you don't have the same kind of goals that you have in commercial real estate brokerage. So making 10 to 20 calls a week, you're considered a superstar. And I realized I could do more than this. So it was a great background, but I knew that there was more out there for me.
No, you said that you got the taste of commercial. Was there a particular deal that made you think, okay, I'm going from analyst now, I want to be a broker? Like, this is it. This is for me.
100%. There was a new development or an area in Pennsylvania called Cranberry Township, which, in the mid 90s was starting to become one of the fastest growing suburbs, in the Northeast. And, that was part of my lending territory. So I met a developer for one of the first office buildings going into that area. And coincidentally, the broker that was part of that project actually had a small piece of the project. And the more I kept learning about the project and the more I kept talking with the broker who was part of it, I started realizing we're both kind of doing the same thing, but his side seems a lot more enjoyable. Definitely a little bit more on the risk side. And at that point in my life, I thought it was well worth taking. So I basically then just cold called that broker nonstop for about 6 months until he finally said, all right, I'm getting ready to do something new. You can come over with me. And I did 30 days after he went over and started a third-party brokerage group of a developer in Pittsburgh. I was his first hire. So worked out really well.
Yeah, that sounds like a lot of excitement. Did you get to experience the development side of it, any of that deal? Like, did you get to go out and take a look or any of that stuff? Or
Oh, absolutely. And it's funny
yeah.
because we still laugh. I actually just toured that same building again with a client 2 weeks ago, and just
Oh, wow.
laughing as I'm walking through the building because it's the fourth
Full
building
circle.
of that development. And the owner, she's still there. But just seeing what has grown around that area. Honestly, it was really exciting because it was just a one-off, which people were thinking, no, that's never going to work. But it really worked.
That's amazing. No, you see that in cities across the nation where you see an area where historically maybe it wasn't, it was either blighted or maybe there's just nothing out there. And then you look fast forward 5 to 10 years and it's just a wave of development that occurs. And, I know here in Louisville, we have a section of our town called Nulu, which is near downtown, which 10 years ago was definitely an area that was very blighted. And now it's kind of the hip place that everyone wants to be. And you see just buildings popping up everywhere. It's unbelievable. So.
Yeah, it's funny. Actually, my partner ended up working with some of the brokers in that same area, and we sold a building there about a year ago. So I had never heard of it until then. But as you said, we ended up getting more for that building than we probably would have thought that we could have.
Well, hey, you got to capitalize on the market when it is, right? And then obviously the owners, I'm sure the owners were very happy with what you guys were able to, or
they weren't disappointed.
They weren't disappointed.
Yeah.
So you touched on a little bit from your transition point. So you I'm assuming at your previous career, you most likely, I'm assuming, had a salary, and
correct.
You probably had performance metrics and bonuses and everything else, but you weren't heavily focused on you kind of an eat what you kill type of environment. So can you kind of tell us a little bit about some of the struggles you faced as you were pursuing that new opportunity?
So absolutely. Now, first and foremost, the smart thing was I was married about 2 years. My wife was making just a little bit more than I was at the bank, but we were just getting over basically scrimping and saving to pay off my student loans, which we were able to do a little bit early, which was great. And so rather than go and buying that bigger house, we basically stayed in the townhouse a couple extra years. And it really was a little nerve-wracking. I would be getting a yellow sticky note from my wife, who was a CPA, on Monday, and it showed how much I could spend on lunches, haircuts, or whatever. And it better not be a negative number by the end of Friday. So she got me really disciplined, and that helped tremendously. And the fun part about it was within 2 years of starting that, we were finally able to get pregnant, and I had turned the corner, and it was almost like tag team, because when we first got married, I'm like, there's no way she's going to be a stay-at-home mom. But, a number of circumstances just came into play, from a positive standpoint for us. And by the time she hit month 7, she said, I think I want to stay home. And I'm like, well, commission wise, we can definitely do that. And it was a perfect transition. So ironically, that was July of 98, and she just went back to work July of 22. So She killed it as a stay-at-home mom, and now she's back and, is director of finance for a local Catholic high school.
Oh, nice. Yeah, I'm glad that she's probably a little grateful she's back in the workforce. Keep her busy, I'm sure.
It is funny because
Yeah.
she'll complain a little bit, but then I'm like, wait, you're happier now than you've been in the past 3 years since the kids were all in college. And she's like,
College,
yeah, I
yeah.
probably am.
Yeah, I can imagine. So I kind of want to, I know that you primarily focus on office and industrial. What made you decide that's your primary focus within commercial real estate?
So when I was first hired, again, the company was Oxford Development Company, a prominent developer in Pittsburgh. Up until that point, the only brokerage they did was for the buildings that they owned. So our
No.
group came in and started third-party brokerage, and the gentleman that was starting it, his whole background was on office tenant rep. And then there was another gentleman that his whole business was on industrial tenant rep. So they brought me on their team, and basically my job for the first 2 years was cold calling on both. So when you are spending your day making 50 to 100 calls on office and industrial only, and all within specific submarkets, it is amazing how after 2 years, being in an industry, you can say, wait, I actually am a market expert, on these particular submarkets.
Yeah.
And it wasn't like that was my goal. It was just, that was my job, to make calls, get as much traction on certain projects as possible. But, after that 2 year time frame, I'm like, wait, I know every tenant, office and industrial, in the Parkway West corridor of Pittsburgh and the northern corridor of Pittsburgh. So, you know what? I should probably focus on these areas. And it just was kind of like osmosis at that point in time.
Yeah.
That's awesome. Yeah.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Jeff. What were you
No,
saying?
you're good. Go ahead.
No. I was just interested to kind of note on that. So when you first got in the business, was it more of just hit the ground running and just start making calls and kind of fumble your way through, or was it more of a strategic type of approach? How did you approach that process of outreach?
It was pure cold calling, and not in a bad way, because the biggest industrial project that was done in Pittsburgh, probably in decades at that point in time, was a little over a 500,000 square foot distribution center. And the industrial partner on our team got the listing on that. And it was so unique that, honestly, it was an easy cold call. I almost don't even call it a cold call, because I had this was obviously before CoStar, you could do everything online. I had a stack of documents about this high with about 8 names of companies and individuals on that. And I just went through that on a daily basis. So it was strategic in that the goal was to get information out on that building to basically every industrial tenant in Western Pennsylvania and Eastern Ohio. But it's not like I sat down with the team, when I was first hired, and said, all right, here is the plan from A to Z that we're going to go through. Once they saw that I was not afraid to make calls and that I was actually fairly good at it, candidly, after that first year, I'd only closed one deal. So candidly, I'm thinking, I am horrible at this business. But at that point in time, they each came to me and said, hey, we want you to be part of our team, and you're going to be getting X% of every project that we're working on. So at the time, I'm like, this is the greatest thing in the history of mankind, because I'm like, these guys don't realize what they're doing. They're giving me money to be bad at a job. What I now realize is, unfortunately, in this industry, there aren't people who are okay just sitting down and making 50 to 100 calls during the first year of their business. And they knew that, and they saw that, and they're like, all right, this is a fairly intelligent guy, and he's willing to do this. So as I said, it wasn't strategic, but it kind of turned into a strategic standpoint, in that by making calls on that one building, candidly, most people were interested in it because they didn't know what this big building was. So I probably had more people who took the call that ultimately, got to the point where I then knew the names of every real estate director or CFO or whatever the case might be of all the buildings in Western PA simply by letting them know about what was going on there.
That's awesome. No, and I think
Yeah.
having something to call on and say and kind of share with those insights is very helpful, especially for starting off. Because I remember when I first started, I was just, to be quite honest, I was just pulling up numbers and just calling random. It was
Yep.
very much a, not so much a value add, sharing to these individuals, and the reception wasn't always the greatest. But you learn how to, I guess, respond and react in situations when you're just having a conversation with people. And if you level with them on a human level, a lot of times you can get a pretty decent response. At least that's my
You're
experience.
100% correct. No, I completely agree. I mean, when you are calling with information that people don't have, they might not want to take time to talk to you, but in a worst case scenario, they at least came out of that 10, 15, 30-second interaction with a little bit of information. So a year later, they're like, oh, hey, weren't you the person that was working on that distribution center? Yeah, actually, I was. Okay, great. Then they at least know who you are because you weren't just calling and saying, hey, I see that your lease is expiring in 6 months and I'm brand new to this business, but I'd love to help negotiate a new lease for you. That doesn't work as well as, providing them with information.
That's great insight on that front. So one of the things that I'm kind of curious about is obviously you've been operating in this market for quite some time, and you've seen the ebbs and flows over time as far as the office and industrial market. So could you kind of maybe share some insights you've gained maybe over the last, let's say, 5 to 10 years about how the environment is shifting for both office and industrial? And obviously, you're focused in the Pittsburgh area, so if you can touch on that, that'd be great.
Absolutely. I look at the shift from office and industrial into a merger, in essence, of the two, especially in our market. Flex space is really something that has been part of our submarket for, I would say, the past 5 to 10 years. And it has definitely picked up a lot of steam over the past 4 years. And one of the things that has helped me tremendously is, as you guys had mentioned, my primary background was, other than that first distribution center that I was calling on, most of what I had done was office tenant rep work. Represented an insurance brokerage company for 8 years across the country, and did a lot of that type of work locally. So I understood the office market inside and out. My partner, Amy Broadhurst, she had spent the previous 10 years of her career doing nothing but Pittsburgh area industrial. So by the two of us teaming up together, a little over 5.5 years ago, we have been able to bring the best of both worlds to the flex market, because we have a lot of companies that say, okay, I need an industrial building. And, we find them the right industrial building. Then all of a sudden they realize, oh, wait, we're going to be building out 30,000 square feet of office. And that's going to cost how many dollars a square foot to build out? Then when they do the math, they realize, wait, we're better off going into one of these flex buildings. We're like, yes, you are. And that has been really eye-opening over the past 3 to 4 years, because, and honestly, even more so in the past year and a half, when you can't build out even an office space within an industrial building for under $110 a square foot. So when you're looking at those kind of numbers, you might see a great warehouse building at the right location, even having parking, and say, okay, great, this is perfect. It's $650 a square foot, but we have to add the office. Well, that's 10,000 square feet of office we're going to add into here. And that's 10,000 times $115 a square foot. And that's just for the office. That's not even talking about upgrading the electrical and docks, et cetera. So when you have buildings that were created specifically for flex, it's amazing how much more money can be saved. And even though your rental rate may be $1 or $2 more than what it is in the warehouse buildings, your out-of-pocket costs are significantly less. And it's been really fascinating to see how many groups have started to realize that over the past couple of years.
Yeah. Was that the dollar per square foot that you're talking about, the 110 to 115, is that primarily in your market that you've been seeing as in Pittsburgh?
I've actually seen that definitely in Pittsburgh, but I've also seen it. We have a client of ours that has 100 locations throughout North America. Most are in the 10 to 25,000 square foot range, a couple larger manufacturing facilities. But we run into that same situation whereby we're like, okay, we're in 30,000 square feet now. We only need 20, but we have to have 4,000 square feet of office. And, we saw that in Chicago as well. It was, at least $110 a square foot. In New Jersey, we would be excited if it was only $110 a square foot. So, and it's interesting when you see those kind of construction costs, all of a sudden renewals become much more attractive than what we were thinking of before. And it's like, all right, if we took 5,000, 6,000, 10,000 square feet more than we really need, but we don't have move costs, we don't have the additional cost to construct additional office. And let's be realistic, just can, push our salespeople to kind of fill up the rest of the space. Or in some cases, there's such a strong market. And we did this in one market whereby we took more than we needed because it was the only building that met all the criteria, but it was already subdivided. So within 30 days, we actually had a subtenant on the other side. So it's not something I would normally recommend as a process for companies to go out, find space, find double what you need, and then sublease the other side. In this case, it really worked out well because it was such a tight market. But that's an example of things that, would never have seen in the first 25 years of my career. But now, because the markets are different, we're looking at transactions in a much more strategic manner than we ever did before.
That's
Nice.
amazing. I can comment similar here in our market. I mean, the flex market is very active. And from what I've heard from other brokers that have operated in the space for a long period of time, the percentage of warehouse versus office has continued to shrink its footprint over time. And you see some buildings here that are quote unquote functionally obsolescent, that maybe their ceiling heights aren't nearly as high as they need to be based on current demand for tenants in the marketplace, and then also the percentage of warehouse or office. So I've seen buildings here that have 50% office, and people are like, I don't need nearly that much office. If we could convert that over to warehouse, then obviously that'd be more attractive. But then as an owner, you're saying, well, we built out all this office and now we got to tear it all out, and you may not get the right price per square foot. So it's one of those things where it's kind of interesting to see. I mean, the real estate industry is a living, breathing entity. So over time, things shift and change, and
that's a great description.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, I mean, like any industry, it really just it evolves over time, and we get a bad rap in the commercial real estate business, is thinking that it's a very slow moving industry. It is, but it's pulsating, right? It's slowly moving and shifting over time. So.
Oh, I can tell you, things that, we were doing 25, 30 years ago, in some cases, there's some similarities, but it is amazing the number of changes that have occurred. And I would say on average, it's, every 5 to 10 years, there are a little bit of additional nuances that have to come into play. There are certain submarkets that go from being completely not considered to being the hottest, and others who everyone's going there now. You're like, do we really want to go there? And we're seeing that with CBD office right now. It is a situation where, yes, in a perfect world, every one of our cities across the country would be back up to 75 to 80% office utilization. But part of the reason that's not happening is groups are realizing that if I'm coming into the office 3 days a week, do I need to be downtown paying the highest, parking rates? Or can I be in the nicest suburb, have more amenities, have free parking, and still have a really cool office? It is such a interesting time to be in the office market right now. I've talked to so many really, really intelligent long-term veterans, both inside with different entities as well as other brokers. And we're all getting a better feel as to what's going to happen. But anybody that says they know exactly what's going to happen is a little crazy at this point in time, because we don't know.
Yeah, absolutely. No, I mean, at some point, something's going to happen as far as the space in these major metro areas, like you had mentioned. I mean, here in Louisville, even before the pandemic, we were having issues as far as office utilization was concerned. And now, post-pandemic, again, that problem's been exacerbated. I know the local leadership change that happened. There's a new mayor in office. I know they're one of their biggest pushes over the next, several years is to really push for the revitalization of some of these projects, because you have these dead zones where it's like these massive office buildings that just maybe are 40% full. And then you have like, Nulu, and then there's another section of town where it's called West Main Street, where there's a lot of hotel activity and stuff like that. So there's a lot of activity in those areas. And then you have this middle area where it's like, there's just office buildings. So,
and it's interesting because, all of us, when we focus on our markets, start getting a little bit worried. You're like, something has to happen because this is only happening to us. When I was traveling, the previous year and a half on a regular basis across the country for SIOR, I was amazed at the similarities to CBDs from city to city to city. It didn't matter if it was Pittsburgh or Denver, New York City or Omaha, St. Louis or Raleigh. Nothing was going like what we saw in 2019, but none of them were that much better. It was really, really oddly similar from market to market. And hopefully that's going to, improve not just, here in Pittsburgh, but throughout all markets across the country, because there is a core that is so important to each of our cities.
Absolutely.
So you touched on a market trending of the per square foot for the build outs of office space. You kind of spoke on talking about the office space and how they're kind of redefining that. Is there any other market trends within the office and industrial space that you've seen since you have been traveling around the U.S. that you might want to mention?
Well, what's really been interesting is I almost wish I was an architect and started that about 2 years ago, because architects now have really been given the go-ahead to really think as innovatively as possible to come up with what is going to entice employees to come back to the office, what is going to be a selling feature for future employees. So they're not just doing your basic standard couple new offices, carpet and paint anymore. They are going out and coming up with some really innovative plans. Then what's happening is those plans can only candidly be implemented by landlords that have access to capital. So when we hear the flight to quality, there's many reasons for it. But one of the main reasons is some of these great designs that are coming out from these architects, they're not cheap. And, they are going to require significant investment. Now, what's happening is because companies are taking less square footage than they did before, and that's actually part of the plans that these architects are coming up with. So let's say a group needs 20% less square footage than they need before, but they really want this truly innovative design. The landlord's going to say, hey, that's fine. We're going to end up providing you an additional $30 a square foot or $40 a square foot in TI more than we would have 2 years ago. But we're also not going to do a 5-year lease for you and probably won't do a 7-year lease for you. So now you're seeing these companies doing 10+ year lease terms with really cool, innovative space, but it's at less square footage than they were before. So even though their base rental rate is higher, we're not rocket scientists in our business. It's simply rental rate times square footage, yes, operating expenses in addition. But if your total square footage is less and your rental rate is higher, but net, if you're a company and you're paying the same in 2023 than you were in 2019 for phenomenal space that really attracts your employees, that's a win. And so it'd be great if all landlords can do that, but candidly, it's only the ones that have access to capital.
Absolutely. Yeah, we had the honor of interviewing another gentleman by the name of Jeremy Neuer. I believe he was at CBRE at the time in New York City, or New Jersey, I should say. Sorry. But he was talking about that similar dynamic where you would see these law firms where, the conversation was, oh, we should try to see if we can get into, more affordable space. But in reality, when you look at your biggest line item, which is your hiring, your wage, if you get into one of these really attractive and dynamic spaces, it helps with your recruiting efforts. And a lot of times what this gentleman was saying was that, you were able to get the top quality candidates you wanted. And a lot of times you were able to pay them less than you would have otherwise. So it's one of those things where it's not just a dollars and cents analysis. You have to figure, how is this space going to impact my biggest expense, which is really, the people I pay wages to. So.
And you really have to look at the market dynamics. I mean, let's be realistic. I'm Gen X. We're the smallest generation there is. As baby boomers are, starting to finally retire out, and Gen X gets to the point where, okay, we can't backfill every job that a baby boomer is going to leave. Then it's like, all right, are millennials big enough to take up all those jobs? No. So we need to come up with something that is going to entice Gen Z to want to work into that particular space, to go to that high-end law firm, to go to that, financial institution. You want to come to Pittsburgh and be in a Class B building, or do you want to go to Denver and be in a Class A building? Okay, you probably would take less money to be in Denver in a cool building and be able to then go hiking and skiing on the weekends. These are the kind of decisions that employees are now making, and employers have to be aware of that. And many of them candidly are.
That's great. That's good to hear.
Read in a building magazine and seen the photos of them actually converting the center area that you would typically have some offices and such. They're taking those out and actually put in amenities like coffee bars and then like couches, and it's almost turning into like a hotel lobby area, but it's within the office. So they're doing that, and I thought that was pretty neat. And then they're converting the exterior offices that may be pretty large and creating mini or kiwi or tiny offices to just fit a desk in there and maybe a chair for somebody to work in a private office. But I found that pretty unique, that was kind of the trend that they were heading down.
And it's interesting. One of the reasons for that trend is, no matter what we want to hear and think about, the days of employees going into the office 5 days a week, 12 hours a day is just not going to happen. So we've had, all of us, and I don't care what generation you're part of, we got used to being innovative as to how we work. And I know with all the traveling I did, there were so many lobbies and coffee shops and Delta Sky clubs, et cetera, that I worked out of. So you get used to that. So when you're coming into the office, the idea of having to be in that 12 by 12 office, even with a nice view, for 12 hours a day, 5 days a week, that's not important. When I'm going into the office, I want to be able to run into our appraisal team or our investment team or some of our retail teams to learn things that I don't know and give them the opportunity to pick my brains, because in doing so, we then are all much more educated on the overall market area. Yeah. And in turn, that's just a win for all of our clients. But if we're all in our own private offices, that's less likely to happen.
Absolutely.
No, I couldn't agree more. So one thing that I'm really interested on, and obviously you've touched on it briefly with your involvement in the SIOR organization, is, what made you decide to really pursue that as something that you were interested in early in your career? And also, what are some of the benefits you've experienced from the organization?
So the same gentleman that I told you brought me into this industry, they were both SIORs. And so they gave me that goal. Literally the day I was hired, they're like, all right, it takes you 5 years minimum to get into this organization. You have to have production of this level, which is going to take you 4 years to do, et cetera. So I'm like, all right, that's a goal. So I set the goal and actually got into SIOR, actually met the production level prior to having 5 years in the business. So I actually became a member the day that was my 50th anniversary into the industry. So it's like, all right, goal achieved. Now what? So I go to my first conference and I realize I don't know anybody. And so I just popped myself into an education committee meeting just because I didn't know what else to do. And it really intrigued me. So the education side of things, and at that point in my career, even though I had the production, there was still a lot of education that I needed. But then what I realized is by getting involved, I met more and more people. each of those individuals were able to help me, become a better broker. Candidly, many of them became referral sources. And over time, I just kept working my way through the system. And the more positions that I took on, the more people that I met. And it's one of the things I love about this business. You can learn so many things from other brokers and other people to find out, what do you do with your investments? How do you handle switching companies? How do you handle, focusing maybe on different areas, bringing in partners? The more I had those conversations, the more I realized I love this opportunity. And at a minimum, it was just 2 conferences a year, and then maybe 1 or 2 committee meetings beforehand. But as time went on, I realized that I'd love to give back. But I thought it was going to take a lot longer in the business before I would even consider running. But when I was asked to run for this position, my initial reaction was, no, I still have 2 kids in high school. It's just not the time. But they said, all right, Pat, let's walk through this. By the time you actually win, you then would be VP for a year, then president-elect for a year, then you become president. So really, when you look at it, your kids will be seniors in college by the time you're actually president. Well, because of COVID, it actually was even later, because I was vice president for 1 year, then president-elect for 2 years, and then president. So it just could not have lined up more perfectly, because I was no longer coaching. I was no longer attending ballets. I was no longer doing all these other things. So I was still able to devote the same amount of time to my business and, the partnership that I have with my partner. But at the same time, I was able to travel the country and probably had one-on-one conversations with over 1,000 brokers in that year and a half. And might have just been a couple words here or there, might have just been a hello, but I was blown away with what I learned. And, the enthusiasm from some of the younger brokers, the expertise from, the older group. One organization or group in particular, I spoke at a group in Kansas City, and I was looking at, and there were a couple new members that were in their 20s, and there were a couple active members who were in their 80s. And I'm like, where else can you have an industry where you have almost a 60-year delta between ages, but each of those folks are still active? That to me was just eye-opening. And it's one of the reasons why a lot of people don't retire from this industry, because it is exciting. It still provides you opportunities. But to me, I looked at this organization and like, man, this really got me to open my eyes and see how wonderful the commercial real estate industry actually is. And more from my standpoint, how great the individuals in SIOR actually are, not only as brokers, but as people.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
Yeah. And it seems like, obviously you have the production goal and the high ethical standard in order you have to be held to as part of the organization. So just by the fact that they are part of the organization, I'm sure that's just the type of caliber of individual that, operates within that sphere. So
100%.
Yeah, that's awesome.
Yeah, that's great. I'd love to see the 20 to 80-year-olds converse over industrial to see, a lot of knowledge and wisdom, and then they're just wet behind the ears type deal coming into the
hustle.
space.
I'm sure it's hustle.
Yeah, I mean,
those kids hustle. I'm sure that's.
It's yeah.
No, the 280-year-olds are both, they still do a little bit of brokerage, but they're developers at this point in time. And the wisdom that they have, the energy that they still have, it was just almost mind-boggling, to be honest with you. I looked at, my parents didn't even make it past 76. And I'm like, and these guys are actually going out and working every single day in their early to mid 80s. It's like, God bless you. This is fantastic.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, Patrick, as we start rounding out the podcast here, I just want to say it was an honor, and I really loved your background, the stories, and just how that you came to be where you are in the commercial real estate. I know one of the questions we always ask our guests, Raphael and I are both avid readers, and so we like to ask, what is one of the most impactful books you've ever read? And it doesn't have to pertain to commercial real estate or even business. It could be something personal that you enjoyed reading that maybe changed the trajectory of your life, or is there a book that might stand out to you?
So it's more of an author. And I
Okay.
don't want to go too much on the religious side, but there is a writer by the name of Matthew Kelly. And Matthew Kelly is a business consultant as well as a Catholic speaker and writer. And he has written so many different books that basically, in essence, have you sit down and say, all right, how am I making decisions? Am I making decisions to be the best version of myself? Whether it is, how I exercise, how I eat, or how I treat other people. And I can tell you, the first 10 books of his that I read transformed my life. And I will be eternally grateful to him, just because it got me closer in my faith, but at the same time, it also helped me become better at what I do for my clients.
It's amazing. Yeah, no, and having that perspective of continuous improvement. I mean, I'm sure there are a lot of, individuals out there that write books that can be that impactful. And I to be honest, I have not heard of him, but I'm looking forward to adding a few of those to my list. I always get the Audible credits every month.
Okay.
So maybe one that I add on to the list.
Yeah,
That's awesome.
I would say good start to some of his business books. A couple of them are probably from about 12, 13 years ago. We actually had him speak at one of our conferences in SIOR, and it was interesting because I had seen him maybe a year earlier at a kind of a religious conference, and I saw him speak from the business standpoint. I'm like, my goodness, this makes sense from all aspects of life. So it was actually very eye-opening.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
No, well, for sure. Well, Patrick, we greatly appreciate your time on the podcast. You provide a lot of great insights, and we're really thankful for the time we spent together. One thing we like to do near the end of our podcast episode is to request that our guests contribute something to what we call the commercial real estate treasure chest. It's a repository of resources that we usually make available to our audience, and usually people contribute, helpful PDFs, spreadsheets, or really anything that they feel would be of value to the audience. So, if you don't mind, I was wondering if would you share what you're willing to contribute today?
So I will figure out, what I can provide, but I was thinking a little bit differently. And that is one of the most important things that I have done and I didn't start doing it to generate additional business, but it was the importance of giving back. And I have served on outside of SIOR 5 or 6 different boards in the past 15 years. Not one of them did I join to provide or to get clients or to do business, but every single one of them has generated significant business for me. Because when you're sitting there, kind of going back to what I was saying at the very beginning, the difference between cold calling and providing additional information. When people get a chance to know you as an individual, then they might 6 months later say, "Hey, Pat, do you do such and such?" And the answer is, well, yes, that's exactly what I do. So from a give back to the group here, again, it's not a PDF, and I do apologize for that. But what I would say is, if everyone has a passion, figure out what you're passionate about, whether it's a nonprofit or a way to give back, and then just get involved. And not involved with the idea of generating business, but get involved because you enjoy it and it makes you a better person. I can, with probably a 99% certainty, say, within a couple of years, that's going to end up generating business for you. And again, how many businesses in this world can you give back with no ulterior motive and then ultimately have it turn into business in the future? That has blessed me over and over again, over the past 20 years. And that's probably the best thing that I could say of everything in our industry. Get involved with a board that you're passionate about, and it's amazing how your life will change.
That's phenomenal advice, really.
Yeah.
And I echo that as well. I think it's amazing how, if you put people in a room that are passionate about the same things, it's amazing what can happen, right? Obviously, from the contribution side of being able to support a cause that you're really passionate about, but also the fact that you have shared values with people, and people like doing business with people that they like and trust, and so you're building those strong relationships, and they know that you're you're rooted in a set of strong values that are positive in nature. And so it makes complete sense why you would generate business from it. So
it's been honestly how I've generated, or not generated, because I'm like, and I don't want to look at it as generating business.
Absolutely.
But it's connections, and our business is great because it gives us the opportunity to really learn and meet and just do a ton with other individuals.
That's amazing advice.
Couldn't agree more. Patrick, again, it's been an honor. I loved hearing all your insights and everything. I've learned quite a bit, and I know other people are going to want to maybe reach out to you, do deals, or maybe ask a few questions. Is there a particular way you'd like them to contact you?
LinkedIn is the easiest. That is, I've definitely, because of SAOR, become more active, on Twitter and specifically on LinkedIn. So that's the easiest way to find me. But I'm also more than open. My telephone is 412-759-4991. And I love talking to people who are passionate about this industry.
It's amazing. Yeah. Thanks.
Yeah. We appreciate that.
Yeah, we appreciate that. And what we'll go ahead and do as well. So if you guys are listening to this in a podcast format, we'll include all that information in the description. If you guys are watching this on YouTube, it'll also be in the description as well. So Patrick, thanks again so much for your time. We greatly appreciate it. If you guys are watching this on YouTube, please like and subscribe. It does make a huge impact in our ability to reach a broader audience. Along with that, if you guys are listening to this in a podcast format, Spotify, Apple, really any type of audio device, please leave a 5-star review. It does make a really big impact in our ability to reach a broader audience, and we greatly appreciate the support. So thanks again for tuning in, and we'll see y'all next time.